My name's Nina Champion. I'm the Director of the Criminal Justice Alliance, and welcome to the launch of Beyond a Numbers Game report. For those of you who don't know, the Criminal Justice Alliance, we're a network of over 180 non-profit organisations and academics working across the criminal justice system. And we started looking at workforce diversity actually back in 2019. We had a first meeting at the Ministry of Justice to start thinking about this issue, and we had a big launch event with Robert Buckland and David Lammy in 2020. Over that time, we've held a number of events and focus groups and interviews with people working across all the different professions of the criminal justice workforce during that time. And we're really grateful to everyone who shared their experiences, their stories, some positive, some not so positive, of their workplaces and their experiences, as well as their suggestions for change. So the positive news, and there is some positive news, that across the various criminal justice professions, progress has been made. We have seen some incremental increases in racial diversity across the criminal justice workforce. And there've also, obviously, in the last few years, been a flurry of reports and recommendations. Some of the people on our panel going to be talking have been highly involved in some of those key reports that have been out and anti-racist action plans, and lots of commitments have been made. But actually, there's a lot further we can go, and the pace of change is much too slow. And also what we identified at the start of this work was that a lot of different parts of the criminal justice system were all working on this issue, and yet they weren't collaborating on this universal issue. They weren't sharing good practice, they weren't sharing their common challenges and sharing solutions. So we've hoped to address that gap by this report today. And really, I think as a result of that lack of joined up strategic thinking, that's why progress hasn't been as fast as we'd like. So as the report title suggests, the topic of workforce diversity is more than just a numbers game. So we've looked at the mutually reinforcing concepts of not only recruitment, but also retention, inclusion and progression. The most activity that was going on was found around recruitment, but much less focus was being spent on retention and progression. And while there was good practice in developing some inclusive work environments, such as the development of well-regarded networks, often this work was undervalued, under-prioritised and under-resourced, and relied on volunteers from racially minoritised communities to lead this, in addition to their other duties. Another area with less focus had been progression, with participants highlighting the various often hidden barriers to career development and moving into leadership roles, such as nepotism and subjective processes that lack transparency. And the final chapter of the report looks at the intersection of race and having a criminal conviction, which leads to a double disadvantage in the criminal justice workforce. So I'm delighted to introduce a range of speakers for today's launch event who'll be able to reflect on those challenges and the progress made. And they'll be giving their views on how we can build on the good practice identified in the report and deliver meaningful change in diversity and inclusion, building the workplaces that everyone would want to look and feel like, and building those workplaces that's represented in that word cloud in front of you. Just a very quick note on language and housekeeping. So in the report, we don't use the terms BAME or BAME. Instead, we've tried to disaggregate data where possible to refer to specific racial groups, or have used the term Black, Asian and minority ethnic or racially minoritised as terms. We've also avoided using stigmatising language where possible, using people first language such as people with a conviction, people in prison, people on probation, or just people. So I'd ask everyone speaking or commenting throughout the event just to be mindful of their language and respectful of their contributions. So we're going to hear from Mark, Abimbola, Avtar, and then Sarah. And there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions, to share good practice, to make comments, to have a discussion. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment or share some practice, could you indicate that in the comments box or raise your virtual hand when we get to the discussion section. And then when I come to you, you can unmute and ask your question or make your comment. And if you have other good practice examples to share, that would be great too. If you can all keep yourselves on mute during the presentations, that would be great to avoid any background noise. And just to let you know that we're recording the event today, and we'll be then placing a copy of the recording on our YouTube channel for people to watch afterwards or for you to share. And at the end, we'll welcome Nola, CJ's Elevate CJS project manager, who'll be talking about our lived experience leadership programme, and there'll be an opportunity to ask her questions about that too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our new policy manager at the CJA, Mark Blake, He's got a long history of tackling racial inequality in the criminal justice system, from being part of the advisory group for the Macpherson inquiry to most recently working in 2 prisons to help implement the Lammy recommendations. So Mark's going to take you through some of the key findings and recommendations of the report, but it will just be a summary. All the detail is in the report, so I do encourage you to read the report, and I know Holly's going to place a link to the report on our website in the chat for people to be able to read in more detail afterwards. So I'm going to pass on now to Mark.
Thanks, Nina. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. The title of the report refers to the theme running throughout the report, that criminal justice bodies need to take a holistic view on this issue, as Nina's outlined. This should address not just recruitment, but also retention and progression. But it also refers to the need for criminal justice organisations to set the challenge at the heart of efforts to bridge the gap between foundering levels of trust in our criminal justice system. This is particularly pertinent as recent events have shaken the foundations of the legitimacy and public confidence that our justice system is dependent upon. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, since 2019, the CJA has held a series of events, focus groups, and conducted interviews with people working across the justice system, exploring the theme of improving racial diversity in the workforce. We wanted to produce a report and an analysis that would help justice system organisations to understand the barriers, what can be done to drive forward change, and why it's important to do so. So in producing the report, we combed through the recent literature and relevant documents. We held a series of focus groups and roundtables with predominantly Black and minoritised ethnic staff working across the criminal justice system between 2019 to 22. We held interviews with senior managers across the justice system. And the fieldwork for this was completed by former colleagues Hannah Pittaway and Amar Ali, and we'd like to note our thanks to them. A link to the event featured in the slide where Robert Buckland and David Lammy spoke in 2020, as Nina's mentioned, is in the chat. Next slide, please. So this slide features some of the data that's highlighted in the report. Progress, as has previously been stated, has been made, but it's been slow. There was a lack of data for civil society organisations, which we'll pick up again later in this presentation. But I think just as a general comment, it was kind of difficult to kind of compare and contrast across the different sort of subsectors across the criminal justice system. So again, I think this whole area in terms of data and sharing data and presenting it in as usable a form so that we can have that comparing and contrasting is something that we'd like to see taken forward. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key external milestones from recent years, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So we had David Lammy's review, which was launched back in 2017, and that was in response to a request from the then Prime Minister David Cameron. We had the murder of George Floyd in the United States and the subsequent global Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Recently, over the last 2 years, we've had our HMI inspectorates of prisons and probation have recently reported on the experiences of Black, Asian and racially minoritised staff. And of course, in just a few months ago, Louise Casey's review into the standards of behaviour and culture in the Metropolitan Police was released. This, I think, sort of highlights issues, particularly Casey's review, the issues of leadership and toxic workplace cultures and racism amongst the workforce and people in contact with criminal justice institutions. And of course, for many of us who are sort of my vintage, will remember the Macpherson report into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence, which set similar challenges more than 2 decades ago. And so hopefully now is the time to see some real sustained progress can be made. Next slide, please. My deep concern is that when people in the system talk about recruiting diversely, what they really want is what they've already got. They just want to have darker skin, but fundamentally they want what they've got. They just want it to come in a different package. That was a quote from one of our focus groups. And I think the message is sort of quite clear. We need to go beyond recruitment. We have to have this focus on greater focus on retention and culture. And I think really kind of more exploration in terms of the cultures that we want to develop within our organisations and the leadership that we're going to need in terms of taking us along that journey. Next slide, please. So this is another quote from one of our focus groups, and our workshop participants believed the biggest barrier to criminal justice agencies being able to recruit more diversely was their inability to address their poor reputations with racially minoritised communities. There was a strong sense that criminal justice bodies hadn't really absorbed this fact, and it was a bit of an elephant in the room. Negative experience of racially minoritised staff left many feeling conflicted in encouraging others from their communities to consider joining the criminal justice workforce. There was also a consistent message of feeling unsafe in the workplace, not just with regards to bullying, but also how racism in the workplace impacts on team working. I think it's quite a crucial point to note, particularly in environments where you're relying on colleagues for your and their personal safety, that team working in terms of supporting each other. Positive action initiatives such as blind applications, proactive targeted marketing, and explaining the process to underrepresented communities were welcomed. Next slide, please. Thanks. These are some good practice examples which were shared, and there are 3 examples highlighted here, which are from Unlocked graduates, Ministry of Justice and HMPPS. However, just reiterating that the point was made earlier, we did feel that more activity appeared to be focused on recruitment rather than retention and progression. Next slide, please. So at the end of each section, there's a checklist really for individuals to reflect on their organisations, but also be hopeful, I think, at an organisational level. And this is just a kind of snapshot of the checklist around retention from our retention section. Next slide, please. All the good work that is being done to recruit then comes into a culture that is still not embracing diversity, race and difference. We're constantly having to work and pedal really hard to keep what we've got. People are being recruited, but they are not staying. This was a quote from Janet Hills, who's a former Black Police Association chair. I think it was evident. It was given to the Home Office Select Committee, who were carrying out an inquiry at the time, sort of 20 years on from the McPherson report. So racially minoritized staff told us they don't trust justice organisations to support their career development and progression. They believed lack of progression was about structural barriers and not individual deficiencies. Performance assessment processes were viewed as biased and unfair, and this echoes government-sponsored research which concluded that current performance assessment processes in the civil service disadvantage racially minoritized staff. The lack of Black, Asian and ethnic minority senior managers in many agencies and organisations in the sector was cited as glaring. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is these are some further examples of good practice from civil society and the probation service. And next slide, please. And again, this is just a snapshot of the checklist at the end of that section. Next slide, please. I don't want to keep drawing back on my own experiences, but being in the service for 19 years and still being at the level that I entered in 19 years later, seeing the people that I've trained with become CEOs, regional directors, all the white members of staff. Again, this is a quote from one of our focus groups. And again, in terms of progression, the feedback from our focus groups was that a sense that the issues around progression were structural, and a strong sense that not enough was being done in terms of supporting staff to move through the ranks within organisations. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is an example of a programme that's run through by HMPPS to support racially minoritized staff, a leadership programme for those staff. Next slide, please. And that's, again, the checklist for organisations to reflect on at the end of that section. Next slide, please. So this is a quote from the Casey review. Even with the practical actions that can be taken to improve recruitment, retention and progression outlined in this report, we conclude that workforce strategies targeting certain communities cannot succeed without also addressing the wider context in terms of legacy, practice, policy and organisational culture. We will be working at CJ as to how to move forward and influence criminal justice bodies in understanding the key issues raised in this report. We also hope to move forward specifically on the challenges for civil society organisations working in the criminal justice system. We need to depoliticise work in this area, which threatens to hamper progress. So, for example, positive action initiatives that are lawful and effective should be supported as good management and a tool that can make our institutions inclusive to all. The issues of recruitment, retention and progression should not be seen as separate, but as interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to run through our sort of 4 of our kind of key recommendations. Firstly, tackling racial disparities in our criminal justice system is vital to improve the reputation of criminal justice agencies. Urgent action needs to be taken to implement recommendations from this report relating to race and improve adherence with the public sector equality duty. And that's another issue which CJ has done quite a bit of work on, and you've got various publications that are available on our website. Secondly, a multi-agency approach is necessary to improve racial diversity across the whole criminal justice workforce. The government should set up a working group made up of government officials, representatives from different criminal justice agencies, and specialist race equality organisations. Recommendation 3, the criminal justice voluntary sector should develop plans to improve recording and sharing of workforce data to enable progress to be measured. And recommendation 4, sufficient resources should be allocated by government to support this work, including investing by and for organisations as reparation for past harms. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, we're just going to run through, again, some further comments that were made through our focus groups. So I won't read these out, but if you can read them. And criminal justice bodies were potentially squandering the best promoters of their organisations and their racially minoritised staff. So that was a key piece of feedback. Next slide, please. Participants shared distressing personal experiences of bullying and toxic working cultures. Next slide, please. As we stated, we did have examples of good practice, and some expressed the belief that with the right leadership and values, change for the better was possible. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks.
Let me just stop sharing my screen. Wonderful. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the report, but I know that Holly's going to put a link to the report in the chat so you can read things in more detail. In particular, those checklists at the end of each section were based all on the feedback from people that we spoke to and different ideas, and hopefully can be used as a bit of a catalyst for people to be able to go away back to their employers, back in their workplaces and work through. Obviously, not all of them will be relevant to every workplace, but hopefully it gives a good practical tool for people to be able to use and think about their own workplaces. So I'm going to go to our first external speaker. So I'm going to introduce Abimbola Johnson. Abimbola is the chair of the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board for the Police Race Action Plan. She's also a committee member of the Black Barristers Network and a frequent media commentator. I'm just going to pass over to you now, Abimbola. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and was honoured to be asked by the CJA to write the foreword for this report. So I had the advantage also of reading the report in advance. And I have to say that even at that stage, it made me reflect on the kind of intersections of the various roles that I hold and how a lot of these quotes or the comments or thoughts and reflections within the report could apply to pretty much any of the areas of my practice. So I started off as a barrister, as a criminal defence barrister, working predominantly in legal aid good work in the Crown Court. Now I do public inquests and public inquiries and inquests, actions against public authorities. But I also, as Nina's mentioned, chair the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board, which is looking at the NPCC, so the National Police Chiefs Council, and the College of Policing's implementation of their Race Action Plan, which aims at eradicating anti-Black racism in the police. I think one of my first thoughts is just looking at the list of people who are attending today and how familiar many of your names and your organisations are. And I think that highlights that to us, those of us who are either sitting as employees or people who interact with these aspects of the system, whether professionally or personally, we see how connected these issues are. And very often, I think as stakeholders or participants in meetings, we come across each other and we hear very frequently the same feedback being shared, the similar experiences which are being shared across the system. And one of the things that I was reflecting on is, why is it that we keep having these very same conversations? As Mark has highlighted, since the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry report, or even if you go back to reports like the 1981 Scarman Review, the concerns which were raised by officers there when they spoke about the culture within policing, although it wasn't labelled as institutional racism at that point, still echoed the sentiments which were present in the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry report, which came some 18 years later. And I think that one of the issues is the devolved nature of decision making within the criminal justice system. So I'll highlight kind of the two areas that I frequent and just the similarities between those. So first of all, we have policing. And under the 2011 Policing Protocol Order, that established the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And that specifically states within there that the establishment of police and crime commissioners has allowed for the Home Office to withdraw from day-to-day policing matters, which gives the police greater freedom to fight crime as they see fit and allows local communities to hold the police to account. So I think that highlights two things, doesn't it? It highlights the fact that the Home Office has deliberately taken a step back from day-to-day policing management, and that secondly, the idea behind this was that local communities would be given the opportunity to hold the police to account more directly. But what we often actually see is that there is a lack of transparency around decisions which are made, and that the communities who are brought in to hold the police to account are often not representative or given different information across different force lines, even within forces, local borough units, or whatever kind of smaller structures that are present within those police units and forces can be variable in terms of the information which is shared amongst them. We also see that within the police, the recruitment or initial recruitment of candidates tends not to have sufficient ethnic diversity to match even the census data that we see coming through. So we know with the police uplift programme recently, there was a commitment which was made by the Home Office to introduce 20,000 new recruits within the police. However, it didn't match in terms of recruitment of Black officers and staff in particular, well, officers in particular. And even then, when you delve into that data and you look further at the journey of police officers through policing, we see that they have higher attrition rates and they frequently report feeling undervalued and underpromoted. So even though that was a Home Office initiative, the implementation of the police uplift programme fell to each individual police force to implement. And you saw an inconsistent approach which was being taken to that programme of work. And then the other area that I sit in is obviously as a barrister. I think something that people may not appreciate is that as individuals, the majority of people at the bar are self-employed, and therefore we fall into much of the traps and observations which were made in the report by the CJA, namely that we don't have centralised human resources functions, that when it comes to dealing with matters such as recruitment, retention, progression, allocation of work, that relies on individual barristers taking their time out to volunteer for different committees, to prepare internal reports, to sit down and cross-reference and to find good practice across the profession. We do have some really good pieces of work which are being rolled out by the Bar Council and also the Bar Standards Board. But I'd highlight that even there, the committees that sit and contribute to those pieces of work are again populated by barristers who do so on a voluntary basis and give up their time to do that. So there's no financial incentive in the kind of traditional sense for individual barristers to become involved in that type of work, nor is there any financial remuneration for the time that they give up to participate in that kind of work, sometimes at a sacrifice of the billable hours that they could be putting into paid work instead. But having said all of that, in both areas, I have to highlight that I have seen some really positive dedication to this area. And I'm always really struck by the willingness of people, particularly those from racially minoritised background, to continue to give their time and their energy and effort into areas of work like this. It's really rare for me to meet any Black or brown barrister, police officer, member of police staff, judiciary, who has not dedicated throughout their career hours and hours of time trying to mentor others, trying to assist with recruitment. There is a huge economy of unpaid work, which is continuing to be contributed to in a disproportionate manner by Black and brown people and their white allies who are really passionate about these. And I just think that one indication of a system that really valued this work and really centred it would be a system that remunerated people for that work, that resourced that work, and that centralised that work to try to encourage people to have more consistent quality and standards in terms of contributions to those areas. So my thoughts around this report are, I think that for a lot of us who work within these areas, it will resonate rather than reveal areas and practices that fall short within our various areas of work. I think that it highlights just how consistent these observations are across different facets of the criminal justice system. But a real positive with this report, I think, are aspects which are included, such as the checklist, really pragmatic solutions to some of these issues, which of course won't solve everything in one fell swoop. But I think it can show just how simple, straightforward steps can be taken by organisations, which can have a wide-ranging impact, and also create some of these environments that people have already highlighted around aspects that they would like to see within their workplace. A workplace that is more meritocratic, a workplace which is more representative, a workplace that listens to people, and a workplace which is safer. So for anybody who is in a decision-making position that has the opportunity to listen to this talk, or anybody who is here that has access to people like that, I would encourage them to share this report and share the recommendations with them to open up conversations around pragmatic solutions to the issues that we see within our various workplaces. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abimbola. And going to move on now to our next speaker, Avtar Singh. So Avtar is one of His Majesty's Inspector of Probation, and he's also one of the co-authors of the report that Mark mentioned earlier into race, equality and probation, the experience of Black, Asian and minority ethnic probation users and staff. So I'll pass on to you now, Avtar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be on the call, and really interesting to hear our previous speakers. I'm sure that people know the probation service is over a century old and has been providing services to people who commit crimes, and the Probation Inspectorate is an independent organisation that reviews the work of the probation service and makes recommendations. Now, I was involved with a colleague, Trevor Worsford, leading a piece of work looking at the experiences of not only people on probation, but also Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff who are involved in the service. And we intentionally wanted it to be a kind of a team approach where there was a white person and a brown person, because I think it's just really, really important that perspectives are included. And we conducted a piece of work when the probation service was comprised of the National Probation Service and community rehabilitation companies. But as people will know, there is now one organisation called the Probation Service. Now, since our initial review, which was completed in 2021, the findings in that review were so concerning and alarming that our Chief Inspector Justin Russell, asked that we would undertake and complete a further follow-up in 2 years' time, and we've just completed that, and I was part of that team. Due to a whole lot of different bits and pieces, it's not possible to speak about that particular report, that particular review, because it's not yet published. But what I can say in terms of a headline is that whilst there has been some progress in terms of Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff within the probation service, there is still much more to do. Back in 2021, we completed a review across what are called delivery units, which are basically areas, and there were 5 of those, and we looked at the work that was done by the community rehabilitation company within those delivery units and the National Probation Service. We asked all Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff who were working in that in those areas, and they were invited to complete a survey, and in total there were potentially 313 people who could have completed that survey, and we had 100 responses. And following that, we carried out what are called semi-structured interviews with 19 people. And having had an opportunity to review the report prepared by the Alliance, the story that is told there is very similar to the narrative that we found within this arm of the criminal justice system, the probation service. And as far as different aspects are concerned, what I'm going to do is just work my way through some of those issues in terms of what we found and how they reflect really what's in the report. And at the end, I'll just finish with some thoughts, reflections from both people, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people who work in the probation service, but also from an inspectorate perspective. Now, I need to start by saying that this wasn't an easy piece of work. Being kind of like a brown Asian person myself, having walked this journey called life, and experiencing what I did, listening to the testimonies and stories, I'm not going to say that it didn't kind of affect me, it didn't touch me. So I just wanted to kind of be very open with you all that this was a really, really tough piece of work to do, and the review, I'm afraid, was equally tough because the messages and the stories that we heard, were very, very disturbing and very upsetting. Now, as far as kind of recruitment, fairness, development and progression is concerned, we did find that minority ethnic staff expressed concerns because there seemed to be a focus on a national recruitment process for appointing probation officers, and the route was considered to be too narrow. And this meant that the people who were selected were from particular backgrounds and lived experiences, and regrettably that meant that minority ethnic people weren't proportionally represented in that kind of selection process. And just to say, we may be aware that there's also a particular shortage of male probation officers entering the probation service, undertaking training. Now, the probation service, did recognise and has recognised that these are issues, and a workforce strategy was launched in 2020. Now, one of the things that I need to say is that it's not it's not a strategy that brings about change, but what brings about change is implementation. It's absolutely right to have a strategy. However, if that strategy remains as a glossy document, sitting on some shelf somewhere, it's not going to have that impact. What matters is, what is being done as a result of that. And what we found, and what was encouraging, was that where there were local outreach events that were trying to encourage people to apply for positions, within the probation service, those local outreach events were the most successful. The national advert, which goes on social media, in the newspapers, it was attracting a particular type of people and not actually leading to a diverse workforce. So we felt, and we found, that it was those local outreach projects that were far more effective. And as Mark shared with us earlier, 14% is the percentage of Black, Asian, minority ethnic people who across HMPPS are employed. From our findings in the survey, again, unsurprisingly, and it really matches what we've been told today, is that 6 in 10 people from a minority ethnic background felt that equal opportunities in staff recruitment were not applied fairly, and over half didn't feel supported to progress in their organisation. Again, echoes of what we've heard about people coming into the service, but the progression support being quite limited. And interestingly enough, and this is something that we think would help progression, is that in our survey, 90% of minority ethnic people did not actually have a personal development plan. And this is something that we would like to see, added within the appraisal process, that people did have these plans. One person said to us, there is mistrust of us Black people. We are not given access to opportunities. Many Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff felt that they couldn't bring their whole selves in the workplace. And I know that resonates with the CJA report. They felt that they had to fit in to survive, and were often viewed with higher suspicion compared to white staff. And in terms of their experiences when they were actually in the service, one of the things that we found and were alerted to was the way that complaints and grievances were handled and managed. And over half of minority ethnic people reported that they simply didn't feel safe raising issues of racial discrimination. And out of the 30 people who did raise an issue around racial discrimination, only 2 people felt that their concerns had been dealt with adequately. So in terms of retention, there is a massive issue here because people, from minority ethnic backgrounds do not have the confidence in the system and the process. And for them to want to remain in the organisation, they need that confidence. One person said, Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff do not have a voice. When issues are raised, we are made to feel like we are the problem. Why should we bother? Who's listening to us? Those are pretty powerful messages, and ones that need to be heard, that people are believing and being made to think that they are the problem simply because they raise issues. What we found was that the rates of self-declaration of ethnicity have actually improved across the country. In recent years, the management information that was available around ethnicity was very variable. So encouragingly, the rates of self-declaration of ethnicity have improved. And the total proportion of ethnic minority staff in the service appears to be slightly below that of the working age of England and Wales. However, staff who are Black are overrepresented and Asian staff are clearly underrepresented. And unsurprisingly, as the reporters found from the Alliance, the biggest shortfall is in the proportion of middle managers from ethnic minority communities. So what what is important for probation as a whole is to reflect the population in the local communities from which staff and service users are drawn. We know we live in communities where some areas have higher populations, some have lower populations, and actually one approach, one size is not going to fit everything. So that bespoke approach is needed. And the reason why it's important to have that diverse workforce is that not only is it to access the best talent, but also so that service users, people on probation, can see reflected in the staffing complement people who look like them and who they presume have an understanding of their communities and social situations. And interestingly, in our recent review, that came across very, very powerfully. Many people said that they would walk into a probation office, on the notices there wouldn't be any black faces and any brown faces, and they felt very uncomfortable in that kind of environment. Regions do have and have developed positive action initiatives for minority ethnic staff and other underrepresented groups who are seeking to progress. And we did find some good examples, and I think we would encourage to build on these. For example, coaching and mentoring was something that was making a real difference. And this is something we found in the Northwest, a program called Breaking the Barriers. There's also a program called Prison, promoting inclusion staff mentoring. We found that in the Midlands, and we found that there was, there was some good work being done there. And also reverse mentoring was found to be making a difference in Yorkshire and the Humber. And we found that in most regions, there were trained panels of ethnic minority staff to participate in staff selection interviews. So that was a development, because previously, often minority ethnic people attend interviews and the panel is all white, and they feel somewhat uncomfortable, and whether their lived experiences will be understood. So just as I come to an end, just wanted to say something about probation officers who we interviewed. And the vast majority said they did receive supervision. However, 3/5 said they didn't receive, supervision that actually was helping them to do their work well. And that was because managers lacked an understanding of their lived experiences. And one probation officer said, never had discussion of the cultural needs of service users in supervision. The focus is on process and task orientated risk and updating systems. And another said, I've never experienced conversations about diversity. So in terms of, where do we go from here, and, reflecting on the contribution of the report from the Alliance, which I think will be a welcome addition, and one which everybody should turn the pages or look on their screens and ingest what is in there. A key message, and this is really critical for Black and Asian people, was about how far does their organisation actually understand the lived experiences of Black and Asian minority ethnic people? How far do they understand their marginalisation, their unequal access to employment opportunities, and them being given labels of being troublemakers? Half of the minority ethnic staff survey did not believe that their leaders fully understood the issues they faced as a member of staff from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. One person said, racism hurts and breaks your soul and very existence. And I think the message there was that whilst, strategies and action plans, were all necessary, ultimately, the highest need was for organisations to actually understand more comprehensively the experiences and to listen attentively to what people were actually saying, because they were from a very, very different starting point in the pathway of life that they had walked. There does need to be an improvement in recruitment and career progression. And as I mentioned again, those were gaps that we found. Representation at senior management level. What we're seeing is that there does seem to be improvements in middle management appointments, but at senior level, there are still issues. And finally, that there needs to be a better handling of racial discrimination grievances and effective tackling of long-standing discriminatory cultures in offices where they exist. Thank you, Nina.
Great, thank you so much, Avtar, and we really look forward to reading that next review. It's great that that Justin Russell, I know he's the outgoing HMI chief inspector, but it's great that he's had this issue on his radar, and to do the follow-up report as well to see on progress is really good to hear. So thank you for that. And going to pass on to Sarah now. So Sarah Coccia, Executive Director of the South Public Sector Prisons, but Sarah is the operational lead for diversity and inclusion action plans coming out of the Lammy review, and also the HMI Prisons thematic review into black male prisoners and black prison staff that Mark mentioned earlier as well. So I'll pass on to you now, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. Unfortunately, not all that's on my name badge, because it would be quite long, wouldn't it, to wear that? But yes, I wear lots of hats in the prison service. And first off, genuinely delighted to be asked to come and speak with you as a group today, and be able to also listen to Abimbola's story and Avtar's reflections about where different services are as part of the criminal justice system, because of course none of us, I'm from the prison element of it, but none of us work in isolation, and the system is wholeheartedly joined up and has similar issues throughout it. So I do think it's about not only how we all look within our own little bit of the system, but also very much how we look across it. So I just thought I'd spend the next few minutes sharing with you where we are as an organisation at the moment, and the specific work that we've been doing most recently in response to Her Majesty's Inspector of Prisons review, which Nina just mentioned to you. So you've already heard from Mark about the Lammy report, and there are a number of actions that are associated with that we've been making good progress on over the last 5 or 6 years. But the thematic into the experience of adult black male prisoners and black prison staff is a real critical moment for us as an organisation. And Avtar Singh, who put the report together from the Chief Inspector of Prisons, I spent a lot of time with him when he was finalising the report, because he wanted to try something different, and I was really pleased that he did, because we've been used to receiving thematics as an organisation for a very long time. So the Chief Inspector will look into something of interest, and historically will send us a report that makes thematic findings and associated recommendations. And then we as an organisation put an action plan together, and then we follow the actions and we provide an annual update. But this felt different and bigger and more important than that, more important than just a set of actions could associate to it. And what Avtar, I think, wanted to really achieve was for us to think differently in the way we responded to it too. And so it had to be written differently. And so it didn't come with a set of usual recommendations. It came with key findings, key concerns, and then really critically, pathways to improvement, where they had gathered together lots of voices to really understand the problem, as Avtar just eloquently reflected, and said, so what are you going to do about it? What is it that you can do as an organisation to really make a difference here? So we got that report just Christmas time, and you can have a look at it. It's on the website. And we spent the next 3 months or so putting together our formal response to that. And now the work's really starting to kick off. Now, the response isn't full of a million things that we're going to do that will just make us feel better to get on with and busy ourselves with. But what it fundamentally does is to start to ask ourselves some longer term ambitions and questions about where we want and need the service to go, because we know that without a longer term ambition and commitment from the whole of our organisation in the prison service, we're going to be talking about this in another 10 years, and we can't afford to do that. We can't afford, as Abimbola said, to have repeat or different types of reports, but pretty much repeating the same things are still happening. So how do we make a real difference? And we've been thinking about that very seriously. And I'll give you some of the ideas that we're working on at the minute, and they're still being built. You know, this isn't you know, can't be written in a day, so to speak. So we've had a race action plan in the prison service for the last few years, which has had a number of real successes. Mark showed some of those good practice areas on the slides earlier, and all of those things that he showed are associated with the actions from the race action plan. So what I don't want to do is suggest that we're starting from point zero. What we got is lots of good things to build on, but they're pockets of good practice, or they might be all in different parts of the country. Certainly, as Avtar said, you know, different bits of practice are in different parts of probation. Well, it's in the same in prison. We've got good bits all over the place, but how do we scale some of that? How do we make that part of our bread and butter delivery and really part of our DNA? What we know fundamentally from the report that HMIP put together on Black male prisoners and Black prison staff is that fundamentally at the centre of all of the report was about good relationships with each other, understanding each other and supporting each other and working together rather than working against each other to make things happen. We know that we want and need prison workforce to be more diverse. In the short term, it will make them safer than they are now, and in the longer term, it will clearly give a more transparent criminal justice system that I know that we're all aiming for. We understand the benefits of a diverse workforce, and that diversity must exist at every level of the organisation. And I'm really pleased, Avtar, you focused on that progress made to get people into middle ranks, but actually it's the senior ranks where there's still so much more work to be done. And that's a similar picture within the prison service to probation service, actually. We can't do this in a top-down way, although senior leadership and ownership of this is incredibly important. But the involvement of our trade unions, the service users, and the key staff network groups that we work with, as well as third sector partners, you know, lots of people on this call, for argument's sake, is really vital to make sure that we do this together and we do it in a collaborative way. Because if we don't, then I'm worried again. We'll be here, as we've said before, in a decade's time, talking about the same thing. So what is it fundamentally that we want to do within the action plan for the prison service in response to this thematic? Well, a key element of our response is about how we improve our professional standards, and I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We want to increase senior leader accountability for this issue because, as I said to you before, it's everyone's concern, not just the specialist person's concern or just my concern as the op lead in prisons. We want to promote collective responsibility through every rank of our service. And importantly, in everything that we do, through every policy that we write or any action that we take in the service, we want to adopt a zero tolerance approach to racism. Now, we know that none of this is easy. And if it was all easy, we would have done it, wouldn't we? But it doesn't make it any less important to do it. And what we've got to do is work together to work out how we do it. So there are some things that we are specifically going to put in place for support for staff. There is a whole set of actions as well required to the improvement of treatment of prisoners, but I won't go through that for the purposes of this call. I'll focus on the staff elements. So I've already mentioned about launching a new professional standards and behaviour function, and that really links back to Avtar's earlier point about the tea room cultures and banterous environments that people have just put up with over the years, and it isn't appropriate. And how do people have confidence that it's going to be, where there is poor behaviour, it's going to be treated and dealt with appropriately? But also, what more do we do to fundamentally improve and professionalise our standards across the board so that it doesn't happen in the first place? So that will be launching in the next few months. Similarly, we're going to launch a race disparity unit, and what that's going to do is share good practice across the country. So where we know we've got really good things going on, how do we roll that out further and make the best of what's going on out there and the brilliant ideas and actions that we know are taking place? Also, the responsibility of the race disparity unit is going to be to monitor progress. And I'll come to that a bit at the end, because for me, there is a kind of so what, how do we know what success looks like in all of this at the end? We're launching representation benchmarks, which will be regional for recruitment. Now, I know you've been talking about how do we keep people, not just how do we recruit people, but those benchmarks will also take into consideration progression. And that's something that we haven't necessarily looked at before. It's always been very much kind of recruitment focused, and it needs to do more than that. We've just finished a pilot, a very quick pilot, but it's worked well on progression buddies. And actually, I'm a buddy for two individuals who have formed part of different programmes to help them in their own progression. The pilot's gone brilliantly across the service, and we're looking to roll that out further across the service over the next few months. A few of you have mentioned reverse mentoring. The benefits of that are obvious. We've had it in existence informally for a number of years, but what we're going to do is launch a formal pilot with that to make sure that we can get more people taking advantage of the reverse mentoring and the education and understanding of people's stories. So I'm an executive director within the prison service. Every executive director within the prison service will be offering a shadowing opportunity for racially minoritised people for our staff. And we're going to do that over the next 6 months to just open up the relationships and the opportunities for all of our staff. You already know that we've got the diverse recruitment panels. It was mentioned earlier on in one of the slides, but what we are developing, or just have finished developing actually, I should say, is an IT matching solution to have a more sophisticated way to create those diverse panels and just help share out the load, shall we say, of how to get the best possible diverse panels for all of our recruitment within the prison service. And we are looking to introduce external scrutiny panels. So again, these exist quite well locally. There are third sector organisations that work with prisons to do this informally, but we're going to be putting together, again, a more formal structure to assist prisons in the future have an external scrutiny panel. And that's really about testing the impact of their ideas, what's working in prisons well, what needs more work, and how do we hear from our frontline staff about what really makes a difference. And then lastly, we've just started a safe spaces pilot, which some of you might have heard about. And that really is about groups of people in prison and staff really sitting and talking together, which sounds so basic for those of you who may not necessarily work in prisons, but we don't have a lot of joint activity. We might do work interventions with staff and interventions with our people in prison, but we don't necessarily do stuff together a lot. And so we've just started a safe spaces pilot that does exactly that. And the early findings from that is that it's really helping to break down barriers, create good ideas, and really tackle issues head on. So just to conclude, there's a lot to do, isn't there? And I certainly don't shy away from that, but I certainly want to be part of it and help make it happen. I do think, and I talk and listen to staff all the time, that I worry we get into let's not carry on talking about it. Can you just do something, please? I hear that all the time. You know, I've talked about this for 10 years. Can we just make a difference now? And I really, really, really believe that now is the time to do that. I'm not sure quite what success looks like, although I have a very good idea. What I want us to do is to work up a way that we measure it successfully so that we know we really are making an impact, rather than just making ourselves feel better that we've continued and actioned a lot of our actions. So I hope that you understanding where we are on our journey today is helpful. I'm sure the race disparity team will reach out to lots of you over the coming months as they get set up, because I really look forward to this next chapter of what we're doing in the prison service. I hope that's helpful, Nina, to you, and I'm happy to take any questions later.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah and Avtar and Abimbola. We've got a few questions coming up in the chat, but and I'll go through those. But I just wanted to come back on one point. Abimbola raised at the beginning, and a key theme that came out of our report was really about the need for adequate resource to resource the networks. As Abimbola mentioned, so much unpaid work has happened over the years, and I just want to get a sense from each of the speakers. Do you think sufficient resource is being put into this to enable those specialist by and for organisations to contribute to value people for their time that are doing work, colleagues within your organisations? Is there sufficient resource, and if not, what other resource would you like to see? So I'll just go back in the order that we came. So Sarah, start, and then I'll get to Avtar and then back to Abimbola.
Yeah, I've just taken myself off mute. So resourcing is always difficult, isn't it? Because there are always lots of priorities. I think there is something about how we use our resources together across the criminal justice system well, because we're so used to kind of funneling down agency by agency, and we might bid for money in a certain way. Whereas actually, I think if we spend more time looking across, we might be able to find there are better ways of doing things and more to share, because why reinvent the wheel? If it works somewhere else, it will probably work here. So I think for me, it's less of a binary issue of is there enough? I think it's more about when everything is so tight and we know that, we can't, there is no open checkbook for these things. How can we work better with what we've got? And I think there are more efforts that we can do across the whole of the criminal justice system. It's about us investing the time to make that happen, so that we do find out more about each other and what we've got in common. So yeah, certainly still more work to do, but I think we can do it. I think it's achievable.
Thanks, Sarah. Avtar, resourcing.
Yeah, well, kind of. I wouldn't want to, kind of disagree, but I feel that I do need to say something, and this is within the spirit of findings from inspection reviews, really. So it's not kind of like a personal thing. But one of the things that we have seen both in our core inspections and also our recent review is that where there has been an increase in resource to help develop, maintain, consolidate, work around recruitment, retention, progression, let's talk, conversation, safe spaces, etc., where that investment has been made, that does seem to be making a greater difference in terms of embedding the kind of the drive for change. And I think that the Race Action Programme has made a huge contribution to that, and ultimately, because that's a national initiative, it'll be what happens locally that will bring about the change in the regions. So what I would say, what we have seen in our inspections, is that where there has been that bespoke resource, where there has been that investment, the quality of change has been better.
Thanks, Avtar. And Abimbola, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, resourcing is something that I've been thinking about in quite a lot of detail recently. I don't know if everyone has seen it, but recently I was on Newsnight discussing a story which had come out about the Race Action Programme, and effectively highlighting the feeling of a lot of the racially minoritised officers and staff who work within the actual structure of the Race Action Programme. So within the structure of the programme developed by the police to eradicate anti-Black racism, the racially minoritised officers and staff highlighted that they felt underappreciated in the very structure itself. And to me, resource means more than money. It means also kind of just looking at structural systems, and that is where I think the true heart of anti-racism lies. Very often people think that anti-racism means empowering people to call out racism as and when they see it. But of course, if you're looking at individuals calling out racism, what they will call out is their immediate experiences of it. Very rarely do people see the systemic racism that occurs. So for me, Resourcing means not just the presence of finance, but also the allocation of resource. And I think that one of the things that the Race Action Programme and other programmes that I've seen, it's not unique to the Race Action Programme in the police, is that when organisations try to come up with initiatives to tackle discrimination, the very structures that they use often replicate the structures of that organisation itself. So you see that your organisation creates or allows racism to embed, but you still introduce a hierarchical regime to try to tackle that. You still value rank or position within your organisation as an indication of qualification for leadership positions within the programmes that tackle these issues of discrimination, rather than, for example, using a different skill set or different skill list for that. So I think resourcing means really thinking about what needs to be valued to tackle discrimination, having a strategic perspective when you create the structures to tackle that discrimination. I think it means identifying areas for expertise. So also recognising the fact that as an organisation, you will have a limited perspective into what needs to be changed. To have a structure that looks only at staff or those who are already involved in the organisation will always fall short when it comes to delivery of transformational practices. I think that it also needs to give a different value to lived experience. Lived experience is something that we talk about a lot in anti-racism work or anti-discrimination work. But I think people really need to consider, well, what does lived experience mean for us? If we're going to deal with an anti-racism programme, how do we value the experience, the actual experience of racially minoritized staff? And in the criminal justice system, those who have that background have a very, very unique perspective, because they are part of those communities who tend to be at the receiving end of disproportionate outcomes by the criminal justice system, which feeds into the reason why a lot of members of our backgrounds don't want to then be employed by the organisations that are seen to exhibit those powers. But it also means that when they are within the organisations themselves, they are part of that organisation, but they're also on the receiving end of a lot of these disproportionate outcomes. So there is a unique value that officers, staff, employees who have those backgrounds have within the insight that they can give to programmes like that. But then if you want them to be able to feel open to sharing those experiences, if you want them to feel empowered to disagree with those who sit above them in very traditionally hierarchical organisations, you need to create a structure that empowers them to do that. So also resourcing means recognising the extra mental and psychological burden of working in anti-discrimination work. And that is true of people who are from any racial background, but it can manifest in different ways. If you are a Black or brown person who's working in an anti-racism structure, it's really difficult to enter into conversations and to constantly need to be professional, to constantly have to work at removing the emotion from the contributions that you are making, to discerning between feedback that you are given and whether that is personal feedback or if that is feedback about the work that you have done, or maybe even shifting the boundaries to recognise that an emotional response in an anti-racism structure is as valid as a cool, calm delivery of a response as well. And if you're somebody who is white, it's recognising that there is extra work to be done in these areas that, and by that, I think that we spoke a lot in June 2020 in particular about doing the work, doing the reading, doing this and doing that. But also there's a burden with that as well, where you would have been more sure-footed if you were working within something which kind of speaks more to your day-to-day practice. You will be second-guessing yourself more frequently in terms of the direction and the management techniques that you may be using, or the way that you speak to those above you in these structures. And so everybody needs an extra level of support when it comes to this type of work. So how adequately is that being resourced? It's also looking at things like the administrative burden of this work. So much more energy goes into, is expended in the substantive work of getting things done, that every hour, every minute that you have to spend on admin as well becomes even more taxing, even more tiring. So really ensuring that people are supported so that they can use their time to concentrate on just getting the substantive work done without the extra burdens of those other areas as well. So you need to see more concentrated work being done on administrative work and so on. And I think Sarah and Avtar have both also highlighted there's a different management technique which is needed in work like this. You have to be extraordinarily emotionally intelligent to manage work in this area. You need to be very forward thinking. You need to take extreme care with people because every conversation will be more emotionally charged than in other areas as well. So resourcing to me means thinking about all of those structures. And I think it also highlights as well the need to make sure that those who have decision-making power are very, very close, or even the same people as those who are doing the day-to-day work within the programme. Because there's nothing more tiring than doing all the work, laying all the groundwork, speaking to organisations, getting them on side, getting employers on side, getting employees on side, and then having the decision-making powers taken out of your hands and having to go off and then persuade somebody else to see the perspective that you've developed in this work. So I'm very keen on having structures which are flattened when it comes to work like this, 2, 3, maybe even 4 layers at most in terms of decision making, but ideally 2 or 3, rather than the 5, 6, 7 kind of layered structures that we're used to seeing in our day-to-day work. And that's true, like I say, in the criminal justice system. We see that all the time in the police, we see that all the time in the judiciary, we see that all the time in probation. We've got that kind of almost militaristic kind of approach to these things, and we need to let go of that. And just to give you guys some insight into what I'm talking about, if you click on the link that I've just shared, which is to my board's website, we have on there the organisational structure of the race action plan, and you can see just the layers that it takes before you get to the decision makers in the programme. And you can see the weight that people who sit at the bottom, so to speak, of the programme carry in terms of the work that they have to do. So I think that it's quite a radical thing actually to look at resourcing and to take an anti-racist or anti-discriminatory approach to resourcing. And if you get that piece right, I think that can completely transform the way that programmes move forward.
Brilliant. Thank you all. That's really fantastic responses and very comprehensive. I'm going to come to some of the people that have made comments to allow them to unmute themselves. I'm going to take all those first and then come back again to each panel member just for their reflections. So Ubaid, is that I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name. Rahman, do you want to unmute yourself? You've made a few sort of comments really interesting on exit interviews about how do we listen, how do we ensure the well-being of staff. Would you like to unmute yourself and just come back on a few of those comments?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
And do you want to introduce yourself first, where you're from as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nina. My name is Ubaid Rahman. I'm a senior diversity inclusion advisor here at the College of Policing, and just wanted to say thank you for setting up this event, and it's really useful, and all the speakers as well. I've just resonated with everything that's been said so far. A lot of it, what's been said, is very similar to what's happening in policing right now, as we've spoken about. But yeah, the questions were really about. I'll throw out one. I mean, I've thrown out a few in there. So there's a question about how we make sure that we're supporting staff networks, because they are. As has been mentioned by Abimbola about how disproportionate number of Black and brown people are volunteering their time. And I've got that experience in staff networks, how we work so incredibly hard and still are not prioritised and not part of the strategy going forward, not part of the conversation, always brought in when it's a reactive response needed rather than proactive, and not properly resourced, not properly financed, feeling disempowered and all that. So how do we really bring staff networks up to the level where these are the people that we should be really supporting to help drive that, that change through the organization, but also be those people who help put talent forward and help with promotion and progression and retention and stuff. So that's my question. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic question. I'm going to take a few more comments as well. I'm not sure if Bryn is still on the line, but I'm really interested in what you were saying, Bryn, about the experience in Wales and the anti-justice, anti-racism action plan there. So I don't know if you want to say a few more words about that and any questions around it.
Hi, Nina. Yeah, Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for this event this afternoon, and thanks to all the speakers. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that obviously in Wales we've got the Criminal Justice Anti-Racism Action Plan. It's a really interesting action plan because it aligns itself with Welsh Government's Anti-Racism Action Plan, though criminal justice isn't devolved in Wales, so it's meant that the criminal justice agencies in Wales have had to sign up to that plan. Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that we have that plan in Wales as well. So thanks.
I just also want to bring in Alex Stevens. Alex, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Hi,
Hello.
Alex.
But what I wanted to ask about was something that Sarah said about senior management accountability for these sort of things, because quite often these issues are sort of shifted sideways to somebody who's given a role but hasn't got the power to do anything about it. So how do we make sure that the people who've actually got the power actually do something about it and something happens if they don't?
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. I'm going to bring in Usman as well. Uzzy, are you on the call still?
Hi, yeah, just having
Hey, that's all right.
yeah,
Very good to see you.
nice to see you again, Nina. I resonate with everything that was said, and early on in my career, I faced racial discrimination, not just for my race, my ethnicity, my religion, but also my lived experience. But I tackled it differently in the sense that if I don't speak up, then this will still happen to others. This will keep happening to others. So I'm more of the mindset of taking action. So we have this knowledge of statistically this is this, and brown people are not in management roles, or black people aren't in management roles. Muslims are seen as others and not part of humanity and stuff like that. So we have this knowledge and we can do all the wishful thinking that we want. But where's the action? Silence mode, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's the point that Sarah made as well, and a lot of people have made on this call, that these, as Abimbola said, they're not, the findings of this report aren't going to be revelationary to people. They're just, again, it's sort of, it's repeating the same things, and there is some positive progress being made, but like Sarah said, so much of it is in pockets, and so much of it is, in areas, and it's not being scaled up and not, really having that kind of cross-joint approach. And so, yeah, your point is absolutely, really valid, Uzzy. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm just going to bring in also Montel and then Patrick, just for their comments as well. Montel.
Hi, Nina.
Hey, Montel.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for your speeches. In fact, it's afternoon now, so good afternoon. Just a quick question to Abby, and thank you very much for your reflections and your thoughts, which, as you know, I do agree with. If you had the power to redesign the model that you've talked about, and I get it, in this country, policing is devolved into 43 separate forces. The Home Office have taken a step back to police crime commissioners. So it's not that easy to influence things that happen on the ground. However, if you were given the power to restructure the race action plan so that it worked for everyone, what would you suggest doing? Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Montel. And finally, Patrick. I'll bring in Patrick.
Thank you, Nina. Sorry, can you see me? Yeah, there we go. My comment was, a lot of it was, I think, was focused on harm. And what I mean by this is when we're talking about the work, particularly the work surrounding tackling racism, a lot of the time, I think when we're putting people in those positions and putting people in those spaces where we make this their responsibility, there's always kind of that question surrounding, are we actually properly supporting them? And if not, are we then, those harms of racism itself, are we then replicating that within our organizations? I gave the example of colorblind racism within the chat, but a lot of that just talks about power and power dynamics especially. And I think when you look at particularly Black members of staff and work surrounding, dealing with anti-Black racism, there's almost kind of that expectation of going above and beyond because, after all, this is your thing, or this is your issue that should be personal and deeply impactful to you. And in making those expectations, we do put additional pressure on Black people, which then further kind of replicates those systems. So that was just one of the examples in which I was talking about within the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. So we've got a wide range of issues there. So just to recap, so Abaid was talking about how do we ensure we support staff networks and they're not just reactive, but actually really embedding them. Bryn was talking about the sort of cross-agency working in Wales. Alex talked about accountability and power. Usman was talking about, there's been so much talk, actually we want to see action. Montel talked about restructuring around the race action plan, and Patrick's then talking about kind of the harms and the replicating and expectations and pressure and Black and minority ethnic staff. So we won't have time to for all of you to go through all of those, but if you want to pick one of those areas that you want to comment on. So Abimbola, if I come to you first, and then Avtar, Sarah and Mark, I'll bring you in as well, just for any final thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, can I just say the quality of questions is fantastic. And there are a lot of these are questions that I myself raised during board meetings and in my kind of scrutiny role. It's actually nice to be on the receiving end, because sometimes I feel as though I'm posing challenges but don't really get the capacity to give my own input into it. So I'll try and bring them all in together. So I think that first of all, that like I was saying before, the structure itself needs to allow capacity for people to raise those concerns without also expecting them to come up with the solutions, particularly when you have racially minoritized people carrying very often the burden of calling out racism. To then say that they're a troublemaker by not having a solution for that, or for raising it in a kind of angry way, even. I'm not saying that you even did that, Lisham, but say that you did. That they should be still very slow to label that as unprofessional, and they should recognise where that comes from and think about that. So Montel and Ubaid, if I could deal with your questions in one go, because Ubaid, you raised the question of staff networks and staff associations, because of course in policing, groups like the National Black Police Association are a statutory body, so they are not just networks, they're actual associations, and how and when they should be used. And Montel, you asked about redesigning the model of the race action programme. What I would do two things. So first of all, I would use staff associations more and less. I think that where staff associations are used is often in the wrong places in policing. I think that they are sometimes brought in on the basis that people want to be able to say, we've consulted with our Black staff and they've said yes or no. They're not given time and space or resourcing support to even really consider the documentation that's before them, and also the extra resourcing that they might want to have so that they can go and consult themselves, so they can pay experts to look into matters. I think that sometimes, very often, in fact, not just sometimes, and I see this in the bar as well, we're used as though we are ourselves anti-racism experts when we are not, but then we're not used when it comes to being experts on what it is to be within the system in the various roles that we have. So we're not brought in at a strategic level, we're brought in at a kind of communications level. Here's the package, go out and tell your community what this is about. Tell us, oh, if you think something's wrong, tell us, but we can't guarantee that we're going to take that feedback on. Whereas instead, we should be brought in at a strategic level. We should be asked to guide the direction of projects. We should be asked where our experience of those issues are. And that ties in with what you were saying about exit interviews as well. Recognition that there's a whole network of people who sit outside of organisations as well, who've had negative and positive experiences and have moved on and gone elsewhere. They should be retained. That knowledge should be retained. People should continue to reach out to them, speak to them, and try to incorporate that knowledge as well. So Montel, if I were to redesign the race action programme, so the first thing I would do is, like I said before, I personally would flatten the structure as much as possible. I would put people in positions not based on their rank in policing, but based on their actual qualifications and skill set. So, for example, you have police officers who are PC level within the police and are therefore excluded from applying to certain ranks within programmes like the Race Action Programme, but they have PhDs in anti-racism related subjects, or they have spent years and years in community engagement in different capacities. I also don't agree with the idea that people who sit in permanent positions within structures like the Race Action Programme should be those who are just from policing. I think that it should have been opened up to external candidates as well to sit there. There's lots of people who have worked parallel to the police for years and therefore have expertise about the police, but also expertise about anti-racism work. So one of the challenges that we have highlighted to the police is that now that there's a vacancy for the programme director role, that they should consider bringing somebody external to policing to sit in that role, or even to split that role, so that you can have somebody who's internal to policing sitting alongside an anti-racism expert and they co-share responsibility. But more to the point, I wouldn't have designed it myself, nor would I have left it to the police to design. I actually would have taken the design itself out for consultation, and I would have had a partner agency that specialises in change management and in anti-racism work, and I would have asked them to come up with a design for the programme, And then I would have consulted the staff networks and the staff associations to see how that would work pragmatically in policing. I would have consulted leadership in policing, but also, more to the point, I would have consulted the rank and file in policing to ask them pragmatically, do they think this will work? Do they think this will filter down to them? Because trickle down techniques don't work. So I would have said to them, how can we empower you to be able to speak to this person in the race action program? What do you need to get that access? I would have gone to local forces and said, does this work for you? This is a national program, but really it's 44 different programs of work because you each need to take individual responsibility. Where do you need to be able to fit into this? How can we empower you to do this? And how do we ensure that if you don't have a PCC or a chief constable who prioritises this piece of work, you're not left behind? So that's what I would have done differently, and that's what I'm asking the programme to do now, because there's still 3 years left. There's still a lot of goodwill. We still have groups like the CJA and its membership organisations who are willing to give up their time to see this work. So I think that now is the time for that to be done. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Abimbola. I'm going to go to Avtar and then Sarah. Just need to be a bit strict on time, so I want to make sure we've got time to bring Nola in at the end. So if you could leave your comments for a couple of minutes. I know that's a lot of topics, but would be great. Thanks, Avtar.
No, that's absolutely fine. The point that I wanted to really make was the disconnect that we have found within our inspections regarding, what senior managers say that they are doing versus the impact that it's actually having on frontline staff. And my main contribution would be about how can all the organizations that we've been talking about, how can we get better at listening? How can we get better at listening? Because just because we think we're doing a lot doesn't actually mean that it's making any difference, or just because we've appointed somebody doesn't mean it's going to bring about change. So just a plea really for seamless listening, and not listening that takes place through a tragic event like George Floyd or whatever, but something that is authentic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Avtar. Sarah.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone's faces, so thank you. It just brings it all to life for me. So I think just a couple of reflections from me, really. I think overall we have to all feel comfortable to have difficult conversations in whatever angle you're coming to this from. And as Avtar says, I have the ability to be open-minded and really listen rather than going in with prejudged views about things. Some of that stuff is going to be really hard. And some of that stuff is going to challenge how we have operated, how we have thought, and how we have measured success in the past. And I really do believe that at the heart of this, we have to trust this process and trust all the people in it, that we want to do the right thing, but that we also all need to be brave. And by that, I don't mean, like go out with a cape on our shoulders. By that, I mean, be prepared to try stuff that might not work, but learn from it and try again. To not give up at the first hurdle, although that's hard, especially if something's emotionally charged. And to carry on working together to find a way through this, because there isn't an option for me. There isn't an option of failure. We have to do this. We don't always know the right way. And this is everybody's role. This is not a strategic document on a filing cabinet. And this isn't the role of somebody down the office with the label on their door. If we work in the criminal justice system, it is our role. And that's where the accountability lies. And, just coming back to that point about senior management accountability, we do have to be really careful in some of that, because sometimes, especially if we go, overboard on what statistical analysis you might pin to someone for accountability, it could drive the wrong behaviours. And so we've got to get it right. But sometimes to get it right, sometimes we have to learn where things go wrong, and we have to fail fast, learn quick, and all of that, and it be a safe environment to do some of that, because we all want the same thing. I think for me, it's about us recognising, those checklists. So the checklists are brilliant in the pack, by the way, when I had a read of those at the weekend. And who are the agents of change for that? I don't think it has to be about being a manager at all. I think it's about everybody who cares about this doing something about it in their own small way. because all of those things will add up and combine to an organisational change. No one person can drive this, and this is on the shoulders of all of us to make a difference. So for me, it came down to, you know, trust, being brave, and us doing the right thing is really what I take away from all of this. And it's been super to hear all of your views today. So really, really grateful to be part of it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah. Nola, I'm going to I was just do the reflections just on the final chapter of the report, which is around the intersection of race and people with a criminal conviction, and then I'll come to Nola to talk about the Elevate programme. We have a few of our participants on the call today, which is fantastic. So let me just share my slides again. So just to let people know really that this piece of work around racial diversity was actually in conjunction with another piece of work that we did around diversity in relation to people with lived experience in the criminal justice workforce. And many of you will know that we published a report back at the end of 2019 called Change from Within, which was based on insights from people with lived experience of the criminal justice system who were working in the sector about the various barriers that they faced in terms of recruitment and retention and progression. And within that report, there's a section which looks at the kind of the intersection of people with criminal convictions or with lived experience of the criminal justice system and race. And also within this report, what came up out of focus groups, again, was this idea of this sort of double disadvantage, this layering of discrimination and stigma. So one of the comments, for example, was around vetting and recruitment. And again, this came across both in Change from Within and with this, you know, Beyond a Numbers Game report around the opaque and onerous vetting processes, where you have issues around risk or perceptions of risk. The idea that actually when you have race and criminal convictions together, this can amplify perceptions around risk and can get in the way of people who've successfully got roles in the sector from actually being able to deliver those roles by going into prisons or police stations or probation. And then the second point that really came clear through both the reports as well was in relation to progression and this idea of being pigeonholed into sort of lower level, for example, peer mentor roles, which are a good starting point, but actually people not being progressed into those sort of middle or senior management positions, into those influencing and policy roles where people have got that intersection of race and criminal conviction. So I'm going to pass over to Nola, who's leading our lived experience leadership programme called Elevate CJS, to tell you a bit more about that programme and how we're at CJA trying to do our bit to address this issue.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I just want to say it's been a really rich conversation this afternoon, and you know, a conversation that's really dear to my heart. And yeah, thank you so much, Nina, for the intro. So I am the project manager for the Elevate CJS programme. But I just want to start by speaking a little bit about intersectionality. And I think I'm going to kind of do away with my notes and just speak from my heart, because this conversation has really been really impactful. As I heard Abimbola speak about, you know, some of the emotional labour that Black and brown people have to face, actually, you know, being kind of challenged and championed to do this work when they are already kind of suffering. It made me kind of think a little bit about the lived experience leadership movement as well, and how sometimes we don't do justice to our stories, and a lot of time people with lived experience are kind of you know, sensationalized for their stories, and there's an understanding that it's all good and well for them to share their stories, but not considering some of the impact and the harm. So somebody else mentioned some of the harms that comes along with that. So I think that there's a lot of crossover. But in terms of intersectionality, I won't give you the full sociological terms, but really it's often misunderstood as kind of identity politics. And it really isn't. It's about using a framework to understand how multiple layers of oppression and disadvantage affect people and their interaction with the world. So in this case, it's about us acknowledging the impact of race, class, and lived experience of the criminal justice system and what that looks like when they intersect. And I think really what we're talking about here is a lack of equality of opportunity, and how that affects individuals and really, you know, stifles their ability to be able to progress, especially in organisations within the criminal justice sector. Page 49 of the report discusses limited progression into senior decision-making roles. you know, and me myself as a Black woman and working in the voluntary sector for over a decade, have sadly seen things that Lashan has mentioned and often faced them myself. So I'm really happy that we're having this open and frank conversation. And as a person that does have lived experience of the criminal justice system, those are often compounded and can make it a really tricky space to navigate and know how to behave. And often, sometimes I feel like I may have to mute my responses because, you know, how will I be received? So it's really nice to be having this open conversation. So, you know, when we look at who's in senior leadership roles, we don't see many Black and brown faces. And then if we want to add on some extra layers, like, are they women? You know, are they gay? Are they from a working class background? It just gets less. You know, we don't see anybody. And like Nina said, that we identified that the double disadvantage in our change from within report, and there was a lot of discussion, and some people said that they felt that they were facing this kind of double type of stigma. So there's already a lot of stigma about, you know, having a criminal conviction or having a family member that's been to prison, but then that being overlapped with some cultural things and how that's perceived in your culture. And then, you know, having to be in the workforce and perhaps to hide or you know, not knowing, do I disclose or should I disclose? And that being a bit of a minefield and the anxiety that brings. And I think that's where the Elevate CJS program comes in, because it's a 12-month pilot and it's about redistributing power to people with lived experience. And I think we've heard the voices of people with lived experience through our peer research and our advisory group, who I must say have been very active in pulling us to task, which has been challenging but good. And it's about how do we help people to dismantle some of the barriers that preclude them from getting into senior level roles, because I think what we do well is that there's an understanding that people that have lived experience can come and share their stories to make NGOs, charities, organisations look good, when truth be told, those individuals probably would have done well whether they were in those organisations or not. Can I go on to the next slide, Nina, just about the modules? So what makes this program different is that it is a year long, and a lot of thought has been put into it about how do we make this program holistic and really help people to develop the networks and equip them with the right skills and knowledge that they need to gain these senior. So when I was thinking about it, I thought we really want this to be a bit of a journey rather than like haphazard, you know, workshops and what have you. So I decided to develop some modules. So the first module is Awakening the Leader Within, and that's all about kind of challenging some of the tropes and the stigma around who gets to be a leader, you know, having the audacity, I say, to take up space in a room where there's nobody that looks like you and stand your ground, and kind of developing that resilience from within to actually be in those spaces and have some of that, what we might call imposter syndrome, and knowing how to deal with that. And the second module is about learning new concepts. So that's where we have most of the skills-based workshops, and we've had loads of stuff like on campaigning and policy, things around framing and how to use language, and really practical, pragmatic things that people will need to support them in their leadership journey. And then the third module is preparing for leadership. And I actually heard a lot of this when Sarah was talking about these work placements. So we think that people need the opportunity to role model leadership. And by having senior level work placements and also shadow boards, that's something very dear to my heart. I'm on 2 boards for Women in Prison and Clean Break. And I think it's a great way for somebody to have a strategic view of governance and of an organisation, specifically if you've been operational. So we will be offering shadow board placements. And the final module is about reflection and aspiring. So at the beginning of the course, people do a 360 feedback to kind of look at where they are, and then they'll do one midway and at the end, and they'll do a reflective journal just for themselves to kind of reflect on their journey and what they've gained from it, and to kind of feedback to us, because it is a pilot, so we can kind of filter through things that would work best next time round. And yes, so, and some of the key things that I think really stands out and make this a more comprehensive model compared to some of the other kind of leadership programs is that there is coaching and clinical supervision running throughout. So it's back to that, you know, thinking about harms, thinking about emotional intelligence, thinking about people not having to use that emotional labor of kind of recounting their stories or talking about things that are triggering, and thinking about, if we're allowing people to kind of do a deep dive into self, how do we support them? And we think it's really important for them to have a therapeutic space, and for them to also have coaching. So if you think of it like, you have these big, massive, lofty ideas, and then your coach kind of helps you to distill them, to make them, more tangible, kind of those SMART goals. And we have 2 residential. So the first residential is based on kind of looking at the interpersonal work and reimagining leadership. And the second one is in partnership with our partners at the University of Westminster, and looks at action research. So how can we use research to, make our work evidence-led, which is really important. And then we have the senior work placement and the shadow board placement. And then right at the end, there's an opportunity for participants to apply for a small bursary. So for those that want to kind of continue their professional development, or have an idea for a campaign or something that they want to start, and have want some seed funding, we can provide that. And obviously also kind of the networks that they will build up and signposting. So this is a wonderful picture. A few weeks ago, we went on a trip to one of our advisory group members' organisation, Reach Every Generation, and he has a place called The Base, which they offer alternative education facilities and kind of youth-run facilities in Essex. And it was really wonderful because Gavin McKenna has a wealth of experience, including lived experience of the criminal justice system. And he really gave us a great talk about being authentic, being congruent, and about some of the challenges that people with lived experience may face. So I think what I want to end on is thinking about, in the spirit of what action do we take, and, how do we move forward with this? If you are in a position of power and you want to be an ally, and you recognise that people have double disadvantages, specifically around race and lived experience of the criminal justice system, work with us to offer those senior level work placements. We will do a call to action, so prospect employers can do an expression of interest over the next couple of weeks. But if anybody wants to reach out to me before then, I'm just going to post my email in the chat, and feel free to contact me, and we can discuss that. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about Elevate. I'm going to try and post this in the chat.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nola.
You're welcome.
Any final questions for Nola? But yeah, her email address will go in the chat, and I know that we're sort of at 3 o'clock now, so I know people might need to head off, but do please get in contact with Nola. We are looking for work placements for our Elevate participants. We've had a really great response to the expressions of interest for shadow board placements, so for organisations with governance to have placements on that. So it'd be really good to get some really good quality work placements as well for our fantastic Elevate leaders. So it's wonderful. It's done for me now to say thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been a really wide-ranging conversation. As I said, we've recorded this, so we will be putting this on our YouTube in due course with the copy of the report. Please do share it widely. Please do use those checklists as a real sort of catalyst for discussion within your own work placements. And as Sarah was saying, there's something that all of us can do. It's all of our responsibilities, and it's been fantastic to hear this, the different perspectives from right across the criminal justice system. And I think what I'm left with is, our original thing, which was around actually this is an issue which cuts across all of our sectors across the criminal justice system, and much more needs to be done to bring together the different sectors to really kind of look at this strategically, sort of cross criminal justice system, because actually, there is some positive work going, so we should be sharing that, but there are common challenges and solutions too. So I think, definitely sort of building on that Wales example that Bryn talked about, really thinking about how we do this in a more clever, smarter, sort of multi-agency way, and properly resourced as well. So thank you so much all for your comments and your discussions and your questions, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, everybody.